Hello, everyone. My name is Carly Jensen, and I am a fellow with the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. Today, I am joined by Megan Kate Nelson. She is an independent scholar and expert in Civil War era studies in the United States West. Additionally, she previously taught at Texas Tech University, Cal State Fullerton, Harvard, and Brown. She's speaking at this year's Civil War Institute Summer Conference on the Exploring Environmental History of the Civil War Roundtable and about her book, Saving Yellowstone, Exploration and Preservation in Reconstruction America. This year's conference is from June 9th to 14th, and you will not want to miss this. Dr. Nelson, thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm so excited to be talking to you about these topics.
Of course, I'm excited to meet you, Carly, and I'm excited for the CWI this summer. It's been a long time since I've been there.
Oh, you're going to have a great time. So just to jump right in, my first question for you is about your scholarship. So you are really well known for your scholarship on the intersection between environmental history and the Civil War era. What initially drew you to study these ties, and how has this subfield in historical scholarship evolved over recent years?
That's a great question. I came out of graduate school as a historian of natural and built environments, kind of landscape historian, as I like to call it, and started out in the Southeast. My dissertation was about the Okefenokee Swamp in southern Georgia, northern Florida. And when I was mucking around in the swamps, I found some ruins. And so that led me to my second book project, Ruin Nation, which led me to Civil War studies. And I imagine, as all people who are attending the CWI know, once you start looking into the Civil War, it's hard to leave it. It is. There are so many interesting stories to tell and so much great research to do. And it was really why, while I was teaching classes in Civil War history, that I discovered these battles that had taken place in New Mexico territory. And I'm from Colorado, and I had never heard of these battles at all, and did not know that Colorado gold miners had taken part in fighting for the U.S. Army to defend New Mexico territory against Confederate invasion. And, as you know, and as everybody at the CWI knows, anytime you discover that there's some component of this war that you had no idea existed, it's an intriguing thing, and I wanted to know more about it. And so that led me to the Three-Cornered War. And in fact, and I'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but the events that I talk about in the Three-Cornered War actually led to the exploration and the preservation of Yellowstone. So those two books are connected, I think, in a way that will surprise many CWI attendees. But all of my books are connected by this interest in landscapes. The Three-Cornered War takes place in the high desert. I'm very interested in the ways that armies fight in different kinds of conditions. And so the high elevation and the aridity kind of acting upon soldiers and especially their wagons during that campaign became really fascinating to me. And of course, then that led me to an interest in exploration of a site like Yellowstone, which has all kinds of different components, lakes and waterfalls and canyons, but also geothermal features. And it's kind of a weird and challenging place, kind of like the high desert. So all of my work is connected kind of in those ways, because I've always liked to think about landscapes and move through them. I spent all my summers as a kid on driving vacations through the country and looking out the window at the landscape and watching the map to tell my dad where to turn. So that really has shaped me as a historian. And your second question was about the field of environmental history.
Yes.
I remember.
How has it kind of evolved over recent years?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, this subfield is pretty new, right? I mean, it all started, I guess it was while I was writing Ruin Nation. So it was really in the kind of mid to late 20 08 and then maybe 2008 to 2010, maybe. And Lisa Brady was writing her great book, War Upon the Land, and Katie Shidley Meyer was kind of right behind us with her book on self-care and the environment. And we started to kind of meet each other and talk, and we were on panels together, and the field just started to grow. And I'm excited for the panel at the CWI to really talk to Tim and Judd, and I think Ken No is on that panel too, right? My good
Yes.
friend No, love him, and his book about the weather, and to really discuss the ways that we see the field really expanding and changing, and where we think it's going to go in the future. And I would love it if Civil War historians who study other kinds of topics really began to consider the landscape also in their studies of different aspects of the war that they might think are not related. So that would be my goal for the future, is that everyone loves the landscape history of the Civil War and integrates it into their work.
That's so fascinating. I think it's really an interesting field that's emerging. And I now know how important it is to look at the evolution of battlefields. I mean, the Gettysburg battlefield of 1863 is not the same battlefield I look at when I go on my Civil War Institute field excursions today. So it's really interesting to see that change. And I'm really interested to hear more about that. My next question is about the research methodologies you used while writing Saving Yellowstone. What were the challenges you experienced while researching? Did you have an opportunity to maybe talk to Native Americans about their ancestors' experience with the creation of Yellowstone?
So the research process for Saving Yellowstone was quite unusual, because I was in the National Archives for my first week of research on the book. I was looking at the Ferdinand Hayden expedition records, which are at the College Park campus of the National Archives, because he was federally funded. His expedition was federally funded, and he was required to deposit all of his records, all of his letters, all of his receipts, everything, his reports with the National Archives. And so he did. And so they hold all of those records. And I was 1 week in to looking at those. It was my first week of research for the book, and that was March 2020. So I was sitting in the microfilm room, and one of the archivists came and said, "You should get what you need by Friday, because we're going to shut down." And then he said, "Oh, I'm sure it'll just be a couple of weeks." So I was writing a bit on a deadline, because I wanted the book to come out on March 1st of 2022, the 150th anniversary of the creation of Yellowstone Park. And so I really had to get going and do it. And so I couldn't wait to go to archives. So I just had to launch into digital research. And I will tell you, this is one of the ways that historical research has really changed in the last 10 years. And I think a lot of my fellow Civil War historians will agree with me. There are so many more documents available to us that are beautifully rendered, digitized, word searchable. I mean, I had access. I had a bit of an advantage, because I was doing the bulk of my research was about a federal project, right? And so there was a lot of government documentation of not only Hayden's expedition, but also Jay Cook's Northern Pacific Railroad, and also Sitting Bull, who, when you do a word search for him in the government documents in the congressional serial set during this time period, the late 1860s to early 1870s, his name just proliferates. You see it start to come up. And with the U.S. Army and the federal government become more and more concerned about him and his leadership of the Hunkpapa Lakota and their defense of their homelands in the Yellowstone Valley in this period. And so that was really fascinating, but I was really lucky to be able to get access to those records, to records at the Library of Congress, newspapers.com. I was able to search Yellowstone expedition, Hayden expedition, Sitting Bull, and at the time the Lakota were known as the Sioux. And so I would look and just see like what are, newspaper reporters talking about? What are the letters to the editors saying about Yellowstone and at this moment, and the passage of the act, things like that. And I was able to amass just an incredible number of sources. Unfortunately, I had 2 research trips to Yellowstone itself canceled because of the pandemic. Yellowstone National Park has a really great archives and records center where they keep a lot of National Archives documents, sort of second and third copies, but they also have originals. They also have Thomas Moran original watercolors in their collections. Yeah, and I was not able to get there before the book was published. So that was distressing, to say the least. I mean, as a landscape historian, I really like to be in the landscape that I'm studying. And the fact that I was not able to go until the book was in copy edits. And so I could make some changes, and I did make some changes actually after the fact. But the pandemic really shaped my research process, and it was a very strange experience to write a book about exploration from my living room.
Wow, definitely.
Yes, yes. And as to your question about Indigenous sources, I did not collect any oral histories, but I used mostly Indigenous created documentation for my recreation of Sitting Bull's story in the book. And so an oral history of him that was published by a descendant. I used all and really privileged the accounts of Lakota history written by Lakota historians. I also had a Lakota Dakota reader who read the entire manuscript for me and gave me a lot of source suggestions, and then also helped me with a lot of the Lakota language, which is in the book. So, I had a plan to go out there and go to Standing Rock and to the big museum that houses a lot of really great material culture and visual images related to Sitting Bull and his history and the Lakota people. And I was not able to go. So unfortunately, but this is what happens in historical research sometimes. Sometimes you're not able to gain access to certain sources. And that shapes the way that we tell our stories.
Definitely. But it sounds like you still had a plethora of amazing sources and resources that you were able to pull from even in the midst of this global pandemic. That's really incredible. Mm-hmm. And to be able to get that out in 2 years when you're still in the research process and all of that, that's really awesome. And it just shows it's just a testament to how technology is evolving and how history is evolving with this push of new technologies, which is really, really cool to see.
Yes. Absolutely.
My next question kind of pulls it back to the Civil War a little bit. Your book clearly emphasizes the centrality of the war in the West and the history of the long Civil War era. How did the sectional tensions of the long Civil War era influence the creation of Yellowstone? And did the creation of the park help rekindle ties between a once divided country in the wake of the Civil War?
Yeah, this was one of my key interest areas as I was researching the book. I was interested to know kind of how the outcome and the fighting of the war impacted this moment, because of course Hayden's expedition took place in 1871, and Congress passed the Yellowstone Act in early kind of March 1872. So this is right in the middle of Reconstruction, right? And this is right in the middle of Ulysses S. Grant's administration. So I think a lot of Americans think, oh, Yellowstone, Teddy Roosevelt created that park. No. It was 30 years earlier than Roosevelt's sort of spate of park creation. And it was Ulysses S. Grant, former Civil War general who had been posted earlier in his military career in the West. He had never been to Yellowstone, but he had been to parts of the West before his presidency on a kind of presidential election tour. And he was quite interested as a former general of the armies in U.S. Indian policy. and how the U.S. Army was going to handle people like Sitting Bull and his Lakota band, and how they were going to really force them onto reservations during this period. And I think Grant was hopeful that they could have some treaty negotiations, but ultimately those came to nothing. So really, this is the moment. This 1871-72 moment is the beginning of the road to the Battle of Little Bighorn, or Greasy Grass, for Sitting Bull and for the U.S. Army, which at this point, Phil Sheridan is in charge of this area. So we see here, I think Civil War historians tend to talk more about all of the officers who were involved in the Mexican-American War, and then we see them again in the Civil War. And here, we're seeing these Civil War generals talking about Yellowstone, sending U.S. Army soldiers, cavalry mostly, to defend exploration groups in Yellowstone. It was Sheridan actually who provided me with the first. Saving Yellowstone is not the book's first title. The first title was This Strange Country. And it was actually Phil Sheridan who sent a group of Army Corps of Engineers guys out with Hayden. And he said, in one of his orders or letters, I want you to go out and explore this strange country, because people had not really, in 1870, Yellowstone was, people kind of had heard rumors about it, but it was not known at all. And it was not fully mapped. It was one of the only unmapped places in America kind of at that moment. And people really didn't know what was there. And the U.S. Army wanted to know what was there. And they were very much a part of Ferdinand Hayden's exploration project. He got a lot of supplies from the U.S. Army. And then he got the protection as well. And if we go back even further, the Civil War in the West, really the actions that I describe in the Three-Cornered War, as I mentioned earlier, really created the conditions for the exploration of Yellowstone. Because the U.S. Army was able to secure control of New Mexico territory, and by virtue of that, the larger West, the U.S. Congress was able to pass the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railway Act. And Hayden was able to get to Yellowstone so quickly and explore it in a very short exploration window. You can only really go there between late May and early September, or else you get snowed on and snowed in. And he was able to go finally because the Union Pacific Railroad had been built and was finished by 1869, and he was able to actually take it from Omaha to Ogden, Utah, and it saved him so much time and so much money that he was able to actually do this exploration. There were former Civil War soldiers, veterans who were involved in this project, all of them from the U.S. Army, no Confederates. So that's something I'll be talking about in my talk for CWI, and giving more details about all of those people and how they served and what their experiences were, and then why they would join in a scientific exploration team in the wake of that. Really, I think also there is this component where the creation of Yellowstone National Park is seen as a benefit to all the people, and something that would help to, and this is the term they use, to recreate the nation, right? Like we think of recreation as a word where we go out into nature and we hike and we do all of these things, right? But it's also recreation. And I think a lot of Americans saw Yellowstone as a place where Northerners and Southerners and Westerners could go and sort of heal themselves. And it could be a space for all Americans. Of course, what that meant was all non-Native Americans. So this was not a space that was going to be an indigenous territory ever again, right? And so that's an important component of the book, that an undeniable dark truth of the creation of national parks is that they rest on native land dispossession. And that there was this argument about northern and southern unity, that they were going to find that in the West, sort of at the expense of Native people. So it's an interesting element, and it kind of my arguments in Three Cornered and then also in Saving Yellowstone dovetail in that regard. That it's kind of hard to think about like, oh, well, wait, like this is something that's supposed to be good. This is like a positive good, that people are in the wake of the Civil War kind of able to find something that that can unite them. But it also involves a cost, right? Native land dispossession. And then also I talk a fair bit in the book about Grant and his pursuit of the KKK, which he definitely saw as an extension of his wartime service. So I'll be talking about that as well as an element of Reconstruction history that we don't usually think about.
Definitely. I for one, never really think about the expansion of a national park or the creation of one as part of Reconstruction. So this was really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
Just one more question to kind of wrap this up.
Sure.
Where do you imagine the study of the Far West and environmental history of the Civil War to be going in the future?
Well, what I hope is that we will just have more and more amazing studies from graduate students who are starting to embrace these fields, because really they are wide open right now. I mean, the Far West is an enormous region, and it's a very diverse region. And so the impact of the Civil War and the Civil War experience in all sorts of different places, they're all pretty unique and interesting in and of themselves. No Native polity had the exact same experience as every other Native polity, right? So, I mean, we could have hundreds of studies of indigeneity during the Civil War. There's room for that, and I think it would be wonderful. Also, with environmental studies, all different kinds of landscapes. I love seeing work on nature, but I also love seeing work on built environments, on roads and towns and forts, and the ways that people imagine the landscape, the way that they move through it. How does the Civil War affect that? And how do things like roads really shape the war itself? I mean, I think we've had some really good work on that. And of course, A.L. Sternhell's book is about movement and roads kind of in that way, but a real material study of things like that, I would love to read any dissertation or book like that.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. It's amazing that there's so much of the Civil War and environmental history that is still yet to be discovered or to be studied in such an extensive way. So I'm really excited about the future of this.
Me too. Me too. I can't wait.
Well, thank you again so much for meeting with me. I'm really excited for everyone to be able to hear more of what you have to say about these topics at the Civil War Institute conference. And I just thank you again for your time.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you in person and then seeing everyone at the CWI in June.